Margaret Sullivan's hand trembled as she reached for the coffee pot, her practiced smile freezing when Rex, the German shepherd who'd greeted her every morning for 4 years, remained perfectly still by the door. The dog's tail, usually wagging like a metronome of joy, hung lifeless. It wasn't his arthritis or age. Rex was staring at her apron pocket where 30 sleeping pills waited in a prescription bottle. Mason Walker jerked forward, his coffee mug clattering against the worn formica. Rex had never, in 4 years of service together through Iraqi hell and back, refused a greeting. The dog's low whine cut through the diner's morning bustle like a blade. Margaret's fingers found the small bottle through worn cotton, the same pocket where she'd kept Danny's photo for 20 years. This morning she'd replaced her son's picture with her exit plan. "Rex, what's wrong, boy?" Mason's voice cracked with the urgency he'd used calling for medics. How long had the dog known what she'd hidden from everyone else? The morning fog rolled off the Columbia River like a funeral shroud, blanketing the small town of Millbrook, Oregon. Population 3,200 and dropping. Another lumber mill had closed last month, taking 40 jobs with it. Main Street bore the scars of economic decline. Empty storefronts with soap-scrawled "for lease" signs, cracked sidewalks where tree roots had won their slow battle against concrete, and Danny's corner diner stubborn as a lighthouse in a storm. Margaret Sullivan had opened the diner 20 years ago with her husband Robert, back when their son Danny was 8 and loved helping crack eggs for the morning rush. The boy's growth marks still decorated the kitchen doorframe, pencil lines climbing until they stopped abruptly at age 18, the day he'd enlisted. Robert's heart gave out 2 years later, they said, from grief, though the doctor wrote cardiac arrest on the certificate. Now, Margaret, 58, with silver threading through auburn hair she no longer bothered to dye, kept the place running on muscle memory and regulars' loyalty. Mason Walker hunched in the corner booth, the one with duct tape covering a tear in the vinyl. 38 years old, but his eyes belonged to someone who'd lived twice that. His hands wrapped around the coffee mug with the careful control of a man who'd learned not to trust sudden movements. 6 years back from Fallujah, 5 since the divorce papers arrived, 4 since he'd found Rex abandoned at the Portland VA hospital. Another soldier deemed too broken to fix. Rex was 11 now, his once magnificent sable coat faded to silver and white, the proud stance of a military working dog softened by arthritis that made Oregon winters brutal. But his mind remained sharp as the day he'd tracked insurgents through Iraqi streets. The German shepherd had served 2 tours, saved 13 lives according to his handler's count, before an IED scrambled his nerves and made him gun-shy. The Army called it failure to perform duties. Mason called it having a soul. Every morning for 4 years, Rex had padded through the diner's door and gone straight to Margaret, tail wagging, accepting her gentle scratch behind his ears before settling at Mason's feet. It was their ritual, sacred as morning prayer. The corner booth gave Mason a clear view of both exits. Old habits died hard, and let Rex stretch out on the worn linoleum. From here, Mason could see Victor Carlisle's construction crews converting the old Jameson building into luxury condos. Carlisle Industries had been circling Millbrook like a vulture for 2 years, buying up distressed properties, waiting for the town to finish dying so they could build their Pacific Vista development. Joe Walker sat at the counter pretending to read yesterday's paper while stealing glances at his son. 78 years old, Korean War veteran, too proud to admit he came here hoping Mason would finally acknowledge him. Emily Walker moved between tables with practiced efficiency, her dark ponytail swinging as she refilled coffee cups. Neither she nor Mason ready to admit what everyone else could see in their matching green eyes. The harassment started small, the way cancer starts with a single cell gone wrong. Margaret discovered it on a Tuesday morning, earlier than usual because sleep had become a stranger since she'd filled that prescription. The sunrise painted Main Street in shades of copper and rust as she approached the diner, keys jangling in the pre-dawn quiet. The word "murderer" stretched across the front window in red spray paint, the letters dripping like blood. Margaret's hand flew to her chest, keys clattering on the sidewalk. 20 years she'd served this community, 20 years of opening at 5 a.m., of remembering how Jim liked his eggs over medium, of slipping free meals to laid-off mill workers, of hosting fundraisers for the high school band. 20 years, and someone had reduced it all to one ugly word. She stood there, frozen, until Rex's wet nose touched her hand. Mason appeared behind his dog, having spotted the vandalism during their morning walk. Without a word, he picked up her keys, unlocked the door, and began filling a bucket with soapy water. They worked in silence, Margaret inside, Mason out, meeting at the glass that separated them. "Kids," Mason finally said, though they both knew kids didn't choose that particular word. By the time the breakfast crowd arrived, the window was clean, but Margaret couldn't scrub the word from her mind. It followed her through the morning rush, poisoning every smile, every "more coffee, hun?" Every time the bell chimed, she expected to see hatred walk through her door. The second attack came 3 days later. Dead roses, 13 of them, left at the small memorial corner she'd created for Danny. His high school graduation photo smiled next to his basic training portrait, American and Oregon flags crossed behind them. The flowers were bound with a yellow ribbon, the kind families tie around trees when soldiers deploy. The card read, "For all the boys who didn't come home because of you." Margaret found them when she went to light the battery-operated candle she kept there. Her knees buckled. Rex, who'd been lying by Mason's booth, was at her side before she hit the floor, his solid weight keeping her upright. "What kind of person—" Emily started, then stopped, her face flushed with anger as she swept the dead flowers into a garbage bag. But Margaret knew what kind. The kind who needed someone to blame, the kind who saw a Gold Star mother and thought, "Your son volunteered, so you must support the war, so you're responsible for all of it." The logic was twisted as barbed wire, but grief and anger didn't need logic. The phone calls started that afternoon. The first one seemed legitimate, a woman asking about catering prices. But when Margaret started explaining the menu options, the voice turned venomous. "I hope you're proud. My nephew came back without legs. Does your coffee taste better knowing that?" Click. Margaret stared at the receiver. In 20 minutes, 3 more calls came. Different voices, same message: baby killer, warmonger, terrorist sympathizer. That one made no sense, but hate rarely did. Mason noticed her flinch every time the phone rang. "Want me to answer it?" "No." She forced her shoulders straight. "I won't let them make me afraid in my own place." But she was afraid. Not of the callers, but of what their words were awakening in her. The guilt she'd packed away like Danny's dress blues, folded neat and stored deep. The health department arrived Monday morning, clipboard wielding and suspicious. "We've had several complaints," the inspector announced, as if Margaret hadn't kept in spotless kitchen for 2 decades. They found violations that hadn't existed. Friday. A refrigerator 1 degree too warm, a crack in a tile that had been there since Bush Sr. was president, a missing signature on a form dated 3 years ago. "You have 72 hours to correct these issues or we'll shut you down." Emily slammed a pan loud enough to make Rex bark, the first time he'd barked in months. "This is bull—" "Emily." Margaret's voice was steady as her hands were not. "We'll fix it." But they both knew this wasn't about cracked tiles. The fake reviews flooded in that night. 1-star ratings on every platform describing food poisoning that never happened, rats that didn't exist, racist service from a woman who'd hosted the town's MLK breakfast for 15 years. Margaret's overall rating plummeted from 4.8 to 2.1 in 6 hours. Mason found her in the kitchen at 2 a.m., laptop open, reading every poisonous word. "Stop," he said gently, closing the screen. "This isn't real." "It's real enough." Her voice was hollow. "TripAdvisor doesn't care if it's true." Rex padded over, pressing against her legs. The dog had barely left her side all week, abandoning his usual post by Mason's booth to shadow Margaret's movements. He'd even started sleeping by the kitchen door instead of in Mason's truck. "He knows something," Mason said, watching Rex's vigilant posture. "He's been acting like he did when—" He stopped, but Margaret heard the unfinished sentence, "like he did when we were waiting for an attack." The eviction notice arrived with Thursday's mail, delivered by a process server who couldn't meet Margaret's eyes. 30 days to vacate. The building's owner, who'd been happy to collect rent for 20 years, had sold to Carlisle Industries. The new lease terms were impossible. Triple the rent, due immediately, plus a $100,000 improvement fee. Margaret sank into a chair, the paper trembling in her hands. Around her, the diner hummed with its usual morning rhythm, coffee percolating, bacon sizzling, regulars arguing about football. Her life's work reduced to 30 days. Rex whined, low and urgent, his nose pushed insistently at her apron pocket, where the pill bottle pressed against her hip. The dog's eyes, clouded with age but sharp with purpose, fixed on hers. He knew. Somehow, he knew what she'd been planning, what the eviction notice had just made feel inevitable. "I'm okay, boy," she lied. Rex didn't believe her. He planted himself at her feet and refused to move, even when Mason called him. The dog had made his choice. Whatever darkness Margaret was facing, she wouldn't face it alone. That night, Mason started keeping watch from his truck across the street. Rex stayed inside with Margaret, alert to every sound, every shadow that passed the windows. The diner had become a fortress, but fortresses could fall. They all knew it was only a matter of time before the next attack came. None of them expected it to come from within. Rex found the camera at 3:47 a.m. on the 7th night of Mason's watch. The German Shepherd had been restless since midnight, pacing between Margaret's apartment door and the kitchen, his arthritis forgotten in whatever urgency drove him. Finally, he stopped beneath the air vent near the coffee station and began pawing at the wall, a soft whine building in his throat. Mason, dozing in his truck, jerked awake when his phone buzzed, the motion sensor he'd installed. Through the window he could see Rex's silhouette, the dog now standing on his hind legs despite the pain it must cause, nose pointed at the vent above. Inside, Mason found Rex still fixated on the vent. The dog looked back at him once, then returned to his vigil, the message clear. "Something's wrong here." Mason grabbed a stepladder from the storage room and, with Rex watching intently, unscrewed the vent cover. The camera was small, professional, expensive. The kind that uploaded to cloud storage that could capture audio as clearly as video. The memory card inside held 2 years of recordings. Mason's blood turned to ice water. 2 years. Someone had been watching Margaret for 2 years. He climbed down slowly, the camera heavy in his hands. Rex sniffed it once, sneezed as if disgusted, then led Mason to the office where Margaret kept her old desktop computer. The dog sat, expectant, until Mason understood. Check the footage, see who's been watching. The first files were mundane, Margaret opening up, serving customers, closing down. But Mason noticed the pattern. The camera activated most frequently when Margaret was alone. Late nights doing paperwork. Early mornings when she'd sit at Danny's memorial corner with her coffee. Private moments of grief captured by an unseen eye. Then Mason found the audio files. Someone had been listening too. "Just miss him so much," Margaret's voice, talking to Danny's photo. 28 years old, he should have kids by now. Should be complaining about my meatloaf recipe. Mason's jaw clenched. This wasn't random harassment. This was targeted surveillance, personal, cruel. He kept scrolling until he found what made his soldier's instincts scream. Footage from last month showing a man in a suit examining the camera angle, adjusting it slightly. The face was partially obscured, but Mason recognized the Rolex, the class ring from Princeton, Victor Carlyle himself. The revelation landed like a flashbang. Carlyle, who owned half the commercial property in 3 counties, who had senators on speed dial, was personally stalking a small-town diner owner. Why? Rex padded back to the dining room, stopping at table 6, Danny's table, Margaret had mentioned once, where he'd done homework every night through high school. The dog began nosing at the bench seat, insistent. Mason lifted the cushion and found a manila envelope, hidden but meant to be found. Inside, photographs. Danny in uniform. Danny with another soldier, both grinning despite the Iraqi sun. The other soldier's name tape read Carlyle, T. Mason's hands stilled. Tommy Carlyle, Victor's son. The last photo showed Danny and Tommy sitting on a Humvee, Rex between them. The dog was younger, coat still rich sable, but unmistakably the same animal now watching Mason with ancient eyes. On the back, someone had written, Danny and Tommy, best friends since basic. Rex loves them both. Baghdad, 2012. Jesus, Mason breathed. Rex whined, pressing against his leg. The morning sun was painting Main Street gold when Emily arrived for her shift. She found Mason at the computer, Rex at his feet, surrounded by printed screenshots and photos. Dad? The word slipped out before she could stop it. Mason's head snapped up, their matching green eyes meeting for the first time in 3 years. The pretense they'd both maintained, that she was just another waitress, he just another customer, crumbled like old mortar. Emily, his voice was rough. Is that why you keep coming here? She gestured at the evidence spread before him. To protect Margaret, or to punish yourself by seeing me every day? Before Mason could answer, Joe Walker pushed through the door, moving faster than his 78 years should allow. Saw your truck here all night. What's? He stopped, taking in his son and granddaughter finally in the same space without pretenses. Well, about damn time. Rex broke the tension by trotting to Joe, tail wagging slightly. The only person besides Margaret who got that greeting. Joe had been slipping the dog bacon for 4 years, thinking no one noticed. We have bigger problems, Mason said, showing them what he'd found. Emily's face darkened as she scrolled through the surveillance footage. That bastard's been watching her shower, sleep. This is illegal. We need to call. No. Margaret stood in the doorway, still in her robe, face pale but determined. Not yet. She moved to the table where Mason had spread the photos, her fingers tracing Danny's face. Tommy Carlyle. He and Danny were inseparable from basic through deployment. Danny wrote about him in every letter. Sweet boy, gentle, his father. She paused, choosing words carefully. His father had different expectations for his only son. Rex moved to Margaret's side, leaning against her hip. She absently stroked his graying head. When they died, when that IED hit their convoy, Tommy was driving, Danny was gunner, Rex was in the back. He was the only survivor from their vehicle. The dog's tail dropped at the memory, even after all these years. Carlyle blamed the military, Margaret continued, blamed the war, blamed everyone who supported it. In his mind, that includes every Gold Star family because we let our children enlist. Her voice turned bitter, as if we had a choice, as if Danny would have listened when he felt called to serve. Emily slammed a coffee mug down. So he's been stalking you for 2 years, planning this? He's been buying up veteran-owned businesses all over the state, Joe said quietly. I've been tracking it. Thought it was just business, but now 5 other places, all forced to close, all owned by Gold Star families or disabled vets. Mason pulled up Carlisle Industries' website. There it was, buried in corporate speak. Redeveloping communities for a peaceful future. Code for erasing any reminder of military service. He's not just after the building, Mason said. He wants to erase Danny's memory. This whole corner. Rex suddenly stiffened, nose pointing toward the window. A black town car was pulling up outside, 2 men in suits emerging. Not lawyers. Mason recognized the type. Private security. Muscle. "They're early," Margaret murmured. "Usually wait until after breakfast rush." "Usually?" Emily demanded. "How long has this been going on?" Margaret's silence was answer enough. Rex growled, low and menacing, a sound none of them had heard from the gentle dog. His hackles rose as the men approached the door. Whatever loyalty and love had kept him by Margaret's side had just transformed into something fiercer. Protection. The bell chimed as they entered, bringing cold air and expensive cologne. The taller one smiled, predatory. "Mrs. Sullivan, Mr. Carlisle wants to make you a generous offer. One time only. Today." "We're not open yet," Margaret said steadily. "Oh, I think you'll want to hear this." He placed a check on the counter. 50,000, cash. "You leave today, we forget the health violations, the back rent you suddenly owe, the unpleasantness that might come if you refuse." Rex stepped forward, placing himself between Margaret and the men. 11 years old, arthritis in his hips, probably cancer growing somewhere in his body. But in that moment he was again the military working dog who'd saved 13 lives in Iraq. His growl deepened, teeth showing. The men stepped back instinctively. The second one reached inside his jacket. "I wouldn't," Mason said quietly. He hadn't moved from his chair, but something in his voice made both men freeze. "Rex here. He's killed for his country, and right now he thinks you're threatening his family." The moment stretched taut as piano wire. Then Margaret spoke, her voice carrying 20 years of grief transformed into steel. "Get out of my diner." The men left, but their message was clear. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. Rex maintained his guard position until the town car disappeared, then limped back to Margaret, his brief show of strength depleted. She knelt beside him, burying her face in his fur, and for the first time in 7 days, Mason saw her cry. Not from despair, but from something fiercer. "They won't take this place," she whispered into Rex's fur. "They won't take Danny's memory." Rex licked her tears, tail wagging slightly, and in that moment, Mason understood. The dog hadn't just been protecting Margaret from outside threats. He'd been waiting for this, for her to find her fight again, for her to choose life over the pills in her pocket. The war for Danny's Corner Diner had officially begun. The windows shattered at 2 a.m. on a Wednesday, 2 weeks into what Mason had started calling the siege. The rocks had notes rubber-banded to them. "Baby killer" on one, "Your son died for nothing" on another. Rex, sleeping by Margaret's apartment door, was on his feet before the glass finished falling, his bark sharp enough to wake the dead. Mason was across the street in 3 seconds, pistol drawn from old habit before remembering he'd locked it in his truck's glove box, one of his therapist's suggestions. Through the broken windows he could see Rex standing guard over Margaret, who sat on the floor surrounded by glass shards, holding the note that hurt most. "Danny would be ashamed," she read aloud, voice hollow. "Don't," Mason said, crunching through glass to reach her. "Don't give them that power." But the damage was deeper than windows. Each attack carved away another piece of Margaret's armor, revealing the raw grief beneath. Rex seemed to sense it, pressing closer to her each day, following her with an urgency that made Mason's combat instincts twitch. Emily arrived with plywood and a fierce expression. "I called Dad, Joe. He's bringing his tools." She paused, then added quietly, "I also called the Veterans Network. The real one, not the Facebook heroes." By sunrise, a dozen people were at work, not just boarding windows, but standing guard. Korean War veterans with coffee and determination, Vietnam vets who'd seen worse than broken glass, Gulf War mothers who understood Margaret's pain, even a young woman named Sarah back from Afghanistan with one arm and enough anger to fuel a small city. "They want a fight?" Sarah said, hefting a hammer with her remaining hand. "They picked the wrong community." Carlyle's response came swiftly. Health inspectors arrived daily, finding new violations. A light bulb 2 watts under regulation, a soap dispenser mounted an inch too high. The water department discovered irregularities in billing. The fire marshal found concerns about occupancy limits that had never existed before. Margaret fought each one, spending money she didn't have on lawyers who seemed oddly reluctant to challenge Carlyle Industries. Rex stayed by her side through every meeting, every degrading inspection, his presence the only thing keeping her from reaching for the pills that still lived in her pocket. Then Mason had an idea. "We go viral," he told Emily one evening as they cleaned up after another vandalism attempt. This time, someone had poured motor oil on the front steps. "Show people what's really happening here." Emily, child of the internet age, understood immediately. Within hours, she had Margaret's story online. Widow who lost son in Iraq being driven out by billionaire. The first video showed Rex comforting Margaret after the window incident. The old dog's gentle care for his human undeniable. The second showed the parade of inspectors, the harassment, the cruelty hidden behind bureaucracy. The response was immediate. Views climbed from hundreds to thousands to hundreds of thousands. Comments poured in from across the country. Veterans shared their own stories of discrimination. Gold Star families sent messages of support. Local news picked it up, then regional, then national. But exposure brought new problems. Protesters appeared, not many, but loud. They held signs accusing Margaret of war profiteering, of sending boys to die for oil. Rex growled at them through the boarded windows, recognizing the threat even if the words made no sense. "How can they say that?" Emily asked, watching a man spit at Margaret's feet as she tried to enter her own diner. "Her son died. How is that profiting?" "Grief needs a target," Joe said quietly. He'd stopped pretending to just be a customer, now openly helping however he could. Some people can't handle the randomness of loss. "I need someone to blame." The harassment escalated. Dead animals left on the doorstep. Rex found them first, always, standing guard until Mason could remove them. Sugar in gas tanks, slashed tires. Anonymous calls to Margaret's apartment at all hours, voices telling her what they'd do if they found her alone. Rex never left her side now. The dog had even stopped eating properly, too focused on his self-appointed duty to care for himself. Mason noticed the weight loss, the way Rex favored his left hip more each day, but the dog refused to rest. It was Emily who made the connection that changed everything. She'd been going through the old computer files, trying to build a timeline of Carlyle's harassment, when she found a folder labeled Tommy and Danny Brotherhood. "Mason," she called, voice strange, "you need to see this." The folder contained emails, dozens of them, between Danny and someone named Rainbow 6, clearly Tommy, based on the context. The messages painted a picture of 2 young men struggling with identity, duty, and family expectations. "My dad will never understand," Tommy had written. "He keeps talking about grandkids, carrying on the family name. How do I tell him I'll never give him that? At least not the way he expects." Danny's response was supportive, protective. "You're my brother, T. Nothing changes that. When we get back, We'll figure it out together. Maybe your dad will surprise you. The last email was dated 3 days before they died. Thanks for having my back, Dee. Whatever happens, I need you to know you saved my life just by accepting me. Give Rex a scratch for me. Mason felt the pieces clicking together. Tommy was gay. In 2012, in the military, Don't Ask, Don't Tell had just ended, Joe said. Kid was probably terrified. Emily pulled up more files, her face darkening. Look at this. Tommy came out to his father in a letter from Iraq, 2 weeks before the IED. And here, she showed them a news archive. Carlisle tried to sue the military, claiming they corrupted his son. When that failed, he turned his anger on anyone connected to the military, Margaret finished. Oh, that poor man, Rex whined, pawing at something under the desk. Mason reached down and found a USB drive taped to the underside. Old habits from a paranoid soldier. The drive contained video files labeled only with dates. The first video stole Mason's breath. It showed a younger Rex in military gear, playing with 2 soldiers in the shade of a Humvee, Danny and Tommy, alive and laughing, the dog leaping between them with pure joy. The camera shook with their laughter as Rex performed tricks, fetched, and finally flopped between them for belly rubs. That's my boy, Danny's voice said off camera. Best morale officer in the unit. More videos followed. Rex alerting to an IED, saving lives. Rex comforting Tommy after what was clearly a difficult phone call. Rex sleeping between their cots, one paw touching each young man as if to keep them safe even in sleep. The last video was different. Darker. Tommy faced the camera directly, Rex pressed against his side. If something happens to me, he said, I want Rex to go to Danny's family. He loves them like I do. Dad won't understand. He'll see Rex as part of what went wrong. But nothing went wrong. I found myself here. I found my brother. I found courage. And this dog. He buried his face in Rex's fur. This dog never judged me for a second. Margaret made a sound like breaking glass. Rex immediately went to her, whimpering with concern. She knelt beside him, running her hands through his graying fur. You were there. You were with them both. The dog's tail wagged once, sadly, as if he understood every word. Mason's phone rang, the security system at the diner. Someone was trying to break in through the back entrance. He grabbed his keys, but Emily was already moving. I'm coming with you. I'm not hiding anymore, she said fiercely. Not from you, not from them. They arrived to find 3 men attempting to pry open the reinforced back door Mason had installed. Not professionals. Their technique was sloppy, desperate. Rex leaped from the truck before Mason fully stopped, charging with a speed that belied his age. The sight of a German shepherd in full protection mode sent 2 men running. The third, either braver or stupider, stood his ground. "Call him off!" the man shouted, but Rex had already recognized something. The dog stopped just short of attack, circling the intruder with hackles raised, herding him toward the wall. In the security light, Mason recognized him. David Reeves, whose son had died in Afghanistan 3 years ago. Different war, same pain. The man held a gas can. They promised me, David said, tears streaming. Carlisle's people. Said if I helped run her out, they'd name the new development after Jamie. A memorial. My boy would be remembered. Rex's growl softened but didn't stop. The dog kept the man pinned while Mason secured the gas can. Emily already had her phone out, recording. They lied to you, Mason said quietly. Just like they're lying to everyone. Carlisle doesn't care about Jamie. He's using your grief. David crumbled. I just want my boy back. I want someone to pay. We all do, Margaret said. She'd arrived with Joe, still in her pajamas and robe. "But burning down my diner won't bring him home." She approached slowly, Rex allowing it but watching carefully. "What was Jamie like?" The question broke through David's anger. "Smart, funny, wanted to be a teacher. Said after he served his country he wanted to serve kids." "Danny wanted to be a veterinarian," Margaret said softly. "Was going to use his GI benefits. Had a soft spot for dogs especially." She glanced at Rex. "Would have loved to care for the ones who served too." For a moment, in the cold security light, two grieving parents stood facing each other. Rex sat between them, alert but calm, as if mediating between broken hearts. "I'm sorry," David whispered. "I'm so sorry." "I know," Margaret said. "We all are." Mason didn't press charges. David left with promises to enter counseling, to stop letting Carlisle's people manipulate his grief. But they all knew this was just one soldier in Carlisle's war. The next morning brought a new crisis. Dr. Jennifer Hayes, Rex's veterinarian, arrived at the diner with a grim expression. "I need to examine Rex," she said. "The blood work from his last visit. I need to check something." Rex submitted to the examination with dignity, but Mason saw how the dog's breathing labored, how he flinched when Dr. Hayes palpated his abdomen. The vet's face grew more serious with each test. "How long has he been losing weight?" she asked. "Few weeks," Mason admitted. "He's been focused on protecting Margaret." Dr. Hayes nodded slowly. "I need to run more tests, but Mason, I think we're looking at lymphoma. The blood work suggests it's aggressive." The diner fell silent. Rex, as if understanding, walked to Margaret and placed his head in her lap. His message clear. Whatever time he had left belonged to her. "Treatment?" Emily asked, voice small. "We can try, but given his age, his previous injuries," Dr. Hayes trailed off, "we might be looking at months, maybe less if he keeps pushing himself like this." Rex's tail thumped once against the floor, his eyes meeting Mason's with perfect clarity. The dog had made his choice long ago. He would stand guard until he couldn't anymore. That was his mission, his purpose, his promise to the boys he'd lost. That evening, the diner filled with an unusual crowd. Word had spread through the Veterans Network about Rex's diagnosis. They came with stories, with photos, with memories of their own service dogs. The dining room transformed into an impromptu support group, Rex at the center, accepting gentle touches and quiet words of gratitude. Sarah, the Afghanistan veteran, knelt beside him with her one arm. "You know what you are?" she whispered to Rex. "You're the best of us, the part that remembers how to love after learning how to kill." Carlisle made his next move 2 days later. The regional news ran a segment, clearly paid promotion disguised as journalism, about the need for development in dying towns. They interviewed Carlisle in his pristine office, American flag prominently displayed behind him. "I lost my son to war," Carlisle said to the camera, managing to look mournful. "I understand the pain these families feel, but clinging to the past, maintaining shrines to conflict, that's not healing. That's not moving forward. Sometimes the kindest thing is to help people let go." The segment cut to footage of Margaret's diner, making it look run down, desperate. They'd used angles that emphasized every flaw while hiding the warmth, the community, the life within its walls. "Bastard," Joe muttered, watching the broadcast. Using his boy's death as a weapon. But Emily was already at her laptop. "Two can play that game," she said. Within hours, she had their response online. The videos of Rex with Danny and Tommy, the email evidence of Tommy's truth, David Reeves's testimony about Carlisle's manipulation. The internet exploded. #Justice for Rex began trending. Veterans from across the country shared stories of businesses Carlisle had destroyed. LGBTQ+ military support groups picked up Tommy's story, furious at a father weaponizing his gay son's death. Gold Star families rallied behind Margaret. Carlisle Industries' stock began to slide. But the billionaire wasn't finished. If he couldn't win in the court of public opinion, he'd win where rich men always won, the actual courts. An army of lawyers descended, filing injunctions, demanding financial records, burying Margaret in legal fees she couldn't afford. Rex watched it all from his bed by the kitchen door, too tired now to follow Margaret everywhere but still standing guard in his way. Mason saw how the dog's eyes tracked every person who entered, how he forced himself up whenever Margaret showed distress, how he fought his failing body with pure will. Time was running out for all of them. The eviction deadline loomed. Rex's cancer advanced. The legal bills mounted. And somewhere in a mansion overlooking the coast, Victor Carlisle planned his final assault on the memory of two boys who'd loved each other in a way he couldn't accept. But he'd underestimated something. The bonds forged in service, whether between soldiers, between human and dog, or between broken hearts learning to heal, didn't break under pressure. They grew stronger. And Rex, dying sentinel of Danny's Corner Diner, still had one last mission to complete. The confrontation came at 3 a.m. on a moonless Tuesday, exactly 20 days after the eviction notice. Rex sensed them first, his head lifting from his bed by the kitchen door, a growl building deep in his chest, despite the cancer eating away at his strength. Mason, keeping watch from the apartment above the diner, saw the vehicles arrive, Carlisle's black town car followed by two unmarked vans. This wasn't lawyers or inspectors. This was Carlisle himself. Mason hit the alert on his phone, sending the signal to the network of veterans who'd been taking shifts. But he knew they had maybe 10 minutes before help arrived. He grabbed the baseball bat by the door, his gun still locked in the truck, a promise to himself he now regretted, and headed down the back stairs. Rex was already in position, standing between Margaret's apartment door and the front entrance, his body trembling with effort, but his stance unwavering. The dog, who'd once tracked insurgents through Iraqi streets, had one last perimeter to defend. The lock clicked. Someone had a key. Of course, Carlisle would have arranged that. The door swung open, and Victor Carlisle stepped into Danny's Corner Diner like he owned it. Which, technically, he did. He looked older than his publicity photos, grief and rage having carved deep lines into his face. Behind him, 4 private security contractors spread out, hands hovering near concealed weapons. One carried a gas can. "Mrs. Sullivan," Carlisle said, his voice cultured, cold. "I thought we might handle this privately, like civilized people." Margaret emerged from her apartment, still in her robe but standing tall. "There's nothing civilized about what you're doing, Mr. Carlisle." Rex moved immediately to her side, pressing against her leg. Carlisle's eyes tracked the movement, and something flickered across his face. Recognition. "That's the dog," he said softly. "From the video. He was with them." "His name is Rex," Margaret said. "He loved your son. Tommy used to sneak him extra MREs. Wrote about it in his emails to Danny." Carlisle's jaw tightened. "Don't you dare speak my son's name. You people, you sent them there. You glorified it. Made them think dying in some God-forsaken desert was noble." "Nobody made them go," Mason said from the shadows, making the security team spin toward him. "They chose to serve. Tommy was proud." "Tommy was confused!" Carlisle exploded, decades of pain erupting. "The military broke him, filled his head with ideas, made him think—" He stopped, unable to say the words even now. Made him think it was okay to be himself? Emily had appeared from the kitchen, Joe beside her, both armed with nothing but courage and kitchen knives. Carlisle's face contorted. He was perfect before he left. My son, my legacy. He was going to marry the ambassador's daughter, run for Senate. Instead, he came back talking about pride and authenticity, and his voice cracked. He sent me a letter from Iraq, telling me he was gay, like it was something to celebrate. Rex whined softly, the sound cutting through the tension. The dog took a step toward Carlisle, then another, his movements careful, deliberate. "Rex, no," Mason warned, but the dog ignored him. This wasn't about protection now. This was about memory. Carlisle stared as Rex approached, the dog's clouded eyes fixed on his face. When Rex was close enough, he did something extraordinary. He sat at Carlisle's feet and offered his paw, a trick someone had taught him long ago, a trick Tommy had loved. "He did that for Tommy," Margaret said quietly. "Every morning at roll call. Your son would laugh and say Rex was the only soldier who saluted him properly." Carlisle's hand trembled as he stared at the offered paw. "This is manipulation." "You're trying to—" But Rex persisted, paw still raised, tail giving a single, hopeful wag. And in that moment, everyone in the diner saw it, the echo of a young man who'd loved this dog, reflected in an old dog's perfect memory. "Sir," one of the security contractors said nervously, "we should proceed with—" "Shut up," Carlisle whispered. Slowly, as if in a dream, he knelt and took Rex's paw. The dog's tail wagged harder, and he leaned forward, resting his gray muzzle on Carlisle's expensive suit. "He remembers," Carlisle breathed. "He remembers my boy." "He remembers both of them," Margaret said, moving closer. "They were inseparable. Danny and Tommy. Your son was happy, Mr. Carlisle. Maybe for the first time in his life, he was truly happy. He had a brother who accepted him completely, work that mattered, and this dog who loved him unconditionally." Tears rolled down Carlisle's face as Rex pressed closer, offering the comfort he'd given to so many soldiers over the years. The billionaire's hand found Rex's collar, fingers tracing the worn leather. "The last video," Mason said, pulling out his phone. "Tommy made it for you. We found it in Danny's files." On the small screen, Tommy Carlisle appeared, young and vibrant despite the desert dust. Rex lay beside him, the dog's head on his lap. "Dad," Tommy said to the camera, "I know you're disappointed. I know this isn't what you planned for me. But I need you to understand, I'm not broken. I'm not confused. I'm your son. And I'm finally brave enough to be honest about who I am. Danny helped me see that. And Rex here," he ruffled the dog's fur. "Rex showed me that love doesn't care about any of the things we think matter. It just is. Pure and simple and real. I love you, Dad. I hope someday you can love all of me too." The video ended. Carlisle crumbled, both arms now around Rex, sobbing into the dog's fur. Rex bore it all, tail still wagging gently, offering absolution that wasn't his to give, but giving it anyway. "He died thinking I hated him," Carlisle choked out. "I got the letter and I called his commanding officer, demanded he be transferred, sent home, fixed. The IED hit 2 days later." Margaret knelt beside them, her own tears falling. "He died knowing Danny loved him. That has to count for something." The security team stood frozen, uncertain. The man with the gas can quietly set it down and backed away. Even hired muscle could recognize a moment too sacred to shatter. "All this," Carlisle gestured weakly at the diner, the eviction papers scattered on a nearby table. I thought if I erased every reminder, every connection to that world, the pain would stop. But it's not the world that took him. It's me. I pushed him away. And now... Rex licked his face, the same gentle comfort he'd given to crying soldiers for over a decade. The dog's breathing was labored now, the effort of standing, of caring, taking its toll, but he wouldn't stop. Not until his mission was complete. "Mr. Carlyle," Emily said softly, "your son's last email to Danny. Would you like to see it?" Carlyle nodded mutely. Emily brought the laptop, showing him Tommy's words. "If anything happens to me, make sure my dad knows I loved him, that I understood why he struggled with this, that I forgive him. And Danny, take care of Rex. He's the best of us." "He forgave me," Carlyle whispered. "Even then, he forgave me." "That's what love does," Joe said gruffly. "It forgives. Question is, can you forgive yourself?" Carlyle looked around the diner, at the photos of Danny on the wall, the flag folded in its case, the community bulletin board covered with pictures of other service members. He saw it differently now. Not a shrine to war, but a testament to love. Love that persisted beyond death, beyond difference, beyond understanding. "The development plans," he said suddenly. "Stevens, get my lawyer on the phone. We're canceling everything. All of it." "Sir?" The lead security contractor looked confused. "The eviction, the lawsuits, all of it. And the other properties, the ones we've targeted. Return them. Full restitution." He looked at Margaret. "I'll pay for the damages, the windows, the repairs, your legal fees, everything." "Mr. Carlyle," Margaret started. "Please." His voice broke. "Let me do this. It won't bring them back, but maybe it's what Tommy would want." Rex's legs gave out then, the last of his strength spent. Mason lunged forward, catching the dog before he hit the ground. Rex looked up at him with clouded eyes full of peace. His mission was complete. The lost father had been found. The message had been delivered. "Get Dr. Hayes," Mason ordered, cradling Rex gently. "Now!" But even as Emily made the call, they all knew. Rex had given everything he had, the cancer, the exhaustion, the sheer force of will it had taken to stay alive this long. The bill had come due. Carlyle helped carry Rex to the booth where Mason always sat, laying him gently on the cracked vinyl. The dog's tail managed one more wag as Margaret stroked his head, as Emily held his paw, as Joe murmured words of gratitude. "You did good, soldier," Mason whispered, his voice thick. "You can rest now. Danny and Tommy are waiting for you." Rex's eyes found Margaret one last time. She leaned close, pressing her forehead to his. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for saving me, for saving all of us." Dr. Hayes arrived to find them all gathered around Rex, a billionaire and a widow, veterans and civilians, 3 generations united by a dog's dying grace. She examined him gently, then met Mason's eyes with a small shake of her head. "He's not in pain," she said softly. "He's just tired. Ready?" They kept vigil as the sun began to rise, painting the diner in shades of gold and rose. Rex's breathing grew shallower, but his tail still responded to each voice, each touch. He'd spent his life bringing people together, in Baghdad, in Millbrook, in this moment that transcended all divisions. Victor Carlyle wept openly, years of frozen grief finally thawing. "I'm sorry," he said to Rex, to Margaret, to the memory of 2 boys who'd loved each other like brothers. "I'm so sorry." As the first customers began arriving for breakfast, drawn by habit and concern, they found an unusual sight. the diner full of people but utterly silent, all focused on the booth where a hero lay dying, surrounded by the lives he'd touched. Rex passed as the sun cleared the horizon, bathing him in light. His last breath was peaceful, a soft sigh of completion. Mason felt the great heart still beneath his hands and bowed his head. "He's gone," he said quietly. But in the silence that followed, something extraordinary happened. One by one, every person in the diner, veteran and civilian, young and old, stood and saluted. Even Carlyle, who'd never served, raised his trembling hand to his brow. They were saluting not just a military working dog, but the best of what they all could be, loyal beyond reason, loving beyond prejudice, brave beyond measure. Rex had completed his final mission. He'd brought them home. The hours after Rex's passing blurred together like watercolors in rain. Dr. Hayes had gently closed the dog's eyes and wrapped him in the American flag from Danny's memorial wall. Margaret insisted, saying Rex had earned it. Mason held Rex's still form while Carlyle made phone calls, his voice breaking as he canceled meetings, halted demolitions, ordered his lawyers to reverse every predatory action. But grief and redemption couldn't stop the world from turning. The hired thugs Carlyle had summoned weren't his only employees on site that morning. 3 more vans pulled up outside, filled with men who hadn't gotten word that the war was over. They burst through the door, expecting an empty diner, eviction papers in hand, crowbars ready. Instead, they found a room full of mourners, a dead hero wrapped in a flag, and their billionaire boss kneeling on the floor like a penitent. "Mr. Carlyle?" The crew leader, a thick-necked man named Brennan, looked between his employer and the scene before him. "We're here to clear the building." "Get out," Carlyle said without looking up. His hand still rested on Rex's cooling fur. "All of you. You're fired." Brennan had worked for Carlyle Industries for 15 years. He'd cleared a dozen buildings, displaced hundreds of people, all in the name of progress and profit. He wasn't about to let a dog's death change that. "Sir, with respect, we have a job to do. The permits are filed. The crew is paid. This demolition happens today." Mason felt the shift in the room's energy before he saw movement. Sarah, the one-armed Afghanistan vet, stepped forward. Behind her, other veterans moved into position. Not threatening, just present. Rex might be gone, but his pack remained. "I said leave," Carlyle repeated, finally looking up. His eyes were red-rimmed, but clear. "This place stands." Brennan's face darkened. "You can't just... The investors are expecting..." "I don't give a damn what they expect," Carlyle roared, standing. "My son is dead. Their sons are dead, and I've spent 5 years destroying everything they touched because I couldn't face the truth. It ends now." But Brennan had his own pressures, his own bosses to answer to. He signaled his crew. "Clear them out. We have a schedule to keep." What happened next would be debated in the town for years. Who threw the first punch? Was it Brennan reaching for Margaret? Was it Mason protecting her? Or was it something else? The ghost of a dog's growl, the memory of loyalty making cowards of them all. The fight was brief but vicious. 20 men with crowbars against a room full of veterans, most past their prime but none past their pride. Mason took a bar to the ribs protecting Emily. Joe, 78 years old, dropped a man half his age with a coffee pot to the skull. Sarah fought with her one arm and fury enough for 10. But it was Margaret who ended it. The gunshot, fired into the ceiling from the revolver she'd hidden under the counter for 20 years, froze everyone mid-swing. "Enough!" she screamed, the weapon steady in her hands. "There's been enough violence, enough loss. Get out of my diner, now!" Brennan and his crew retreated, dragging their wounded, but as they reached the door, he turned back. "This isn't over. Carlyle Industries has contracts, obligations. One old man's guilt won't stop that." They left, but the threat lingered like smoke. Carlyle slumped in a booth, the fight having drained whatever energy grief had left him. "He's right," he said quietly. "The board, the investors, they won't let me just walk away. Too much money at stake." "Then we fight them too," Emily said fiercely, pressing a towel to a cut on Mason's forehead. "With what?" Carlyle laughed bitterly. "I've spent 5 years building this machine. Stock options, contract clauses, poison pills. I made sure no one could stop us, not even me." Margaret safetied the revolver and set it on the counter. Her hands shook, but her voice was steady. "There's always a way. Danny used to say that. Tommy, too, according to his letters." Rex's body lay peaceful amid the chaos, untouched by the violence. Mason found himself staring at the dog, remembering something from Iraq. Rex had always found a way, through minefields, through firefights, through impossible odds, always a way forward. "The video," he said suddenly. "Emily, you still have all those files?" She nodded, already understanding. "Everything. 2 years of surveillance. The admission that he's been targeting veteran businesses, the hired attacks, all of it." "It's not enough," Carlyle said. "My lawyers will spin it. Mental distress from grief, temporary instability. The board will have me declared incompetent before they let me tank their profits." "Then we need more," Margaret said. She looked at Rex one more time, drawing strength from his stillness. "We need the truth. All of it." Over the next hours, as Dr. Hayes made arrangements for Rex's body and the diner slowly returned to a semblance of normal, they dug deeper. Emily worked her digital magic while Mason made calls to contacts he hadn't spoken to since discharge. Joe worked the old-fashioned network, veterans who'd been hurt by Carlyle Industries but never connected the dots. The pattern that emerged was damning. Not just veteran businesses, but specifically those connected to LGBTQ+ service members. A lesbian couples bar in Seattle, a trans veterans bookstore in Sacramento, always the same method: surveillance, harassment, financial pressure, forced sale. "Jesus," Carlyle breathed as the evidence mounted. "What have I done?" "You've been hunting your son's ghost," Margaret said gently. "Punishing everyone who reminded you of what you couldn't accept." Emily's laptop chimed. She'd been running financial traces, following money trails. Her face went pale. "Mr. Carlyle, who's Richard Brennan to you?" "My head of acquisitions." "Why?" "Because he's been stealing from you. Millions. Every property you've taken. He's been skimming from the sales, funneling it through shell companies." She turned the screen toward him. "And look at this. 3 days ago, he filed paperwork to have you removed as CEO, claiming mental instability. The attack today, it wasn't about the diner. It was about getting video evidence of you breaking down." Carlyle stared at the screen, understanding dawning. "He's been using me, my grief, pointing me at targets while he profited from the destruction." "Rex knew," Mason said quietly. "That's why he was so agitated these past weeks." He sensed the real threat. Margaret stood, decision crystallizing. "Then we stop hiding. We take this public. All of it." "The board will destroy me," Carlyle said. "Good," Sarah interjected from where she was icing her knuckles. "You earned it." "No," Margaret said firmly. "We do this right. For Danny, for Tommy, for Rex." She looked at Carlyle. "You want redemption? Earn it. Stand up at your next board meeting and tell the truth, all of it." "They'll take everything," he whispered. "Everything you built on hate," Joe corrected. "What you build after, that's what counts." Carlyle looked around the battered diner at the people who should have been his enemies offering him a path forward. His eyes fell on Rex one last time, the dog who'd remembered his son's love when he'd forgotten it himself. "The board meets tomorrow," he said slowly. "Emergency session about the PR crisis you've caused." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "They have no idea what crisis looks like." Mason's phone rang. It was the veteran network. Word of the morning's fight had spread. People were coming, not just from Millbrook but from Portland, Seattle, everywhere the story had reached. They were coming to stand guard, to bear witness, to ensure Danny's corner diner survived. "We need to prepare," Mason said. "This isn't over. Brennan won't go quietly." Margaret nodded, but her eyes were on Rex. "First, we say goodbye properly. He deserves that." As the sun climbed higher, they prepared for two battles, one for a dog's memory, one for a diner's future. But Rex had taught them something in his final hours. Sometimes the greatest victory comes not from winning the fight, but from changing the heart of your enemy. The tragedy was that it had taken Rex's death to break through Carlisle's armor. The hope was that his sacrifice might save more than just one diner. It might save a soul. The video played on every major news network by evening. Emily had edited it masterfully. Rex's final moments, Carlisle's breakdown, the confession about Tommy, the fight with Brennan's crew. But the most powerful moment was simple. Margaret holding Rex while Carlisle wept. Two parents united by loss and a dog's dying grace. Within hours, #Rex Last Mission was trending globally. Veterans shared their own stories of dogs who'd saved them. LGBTQ+ service members spoke about the battles they'd fought, both overseas and at home. Gold Star families posted pictures of children lost, dreams unfulfilled, love that transcended death. Carlisle sat in Margaret's office, looking haggard but determined. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing. Board members, lawyers, PR flacks, all demanding damage control. He'd ignored them all, instead working with Emily to compile evidence of Brennan's embezzlement and the systematic targeting of veteran businesses. "There's something else," Emily said, pulling up financial records. "The $400,000 Danny's life insurance. You never claimed it, Margaret. But look, it's been sitting in an escrow account gathering interest. It's worth almost $600,000 now." Margaret's hands trembled. "I couldn't. Blood money. How could I profit from my son's death?" "It's not profit," Mason said gently. "It's his final gift. What would Danny want you to do with it?" Before Margaret could answer, Joe pointed out the window. "We've got company." Cars filled the street, parking wherever they could find space. Veterans in motorcycle leathers, families with children, elderly couples leaning on each other. They came in waves. Someone had set up a projector in the parking lot, playing the video of Rex with Danny and Tommy on repeat. Candles appeared, flowers, American flags, and dog toys, offerings for a four-legged soldier. But across the street, Brennan's crew gathered too. They'd returned with more men, some carrying signs. "Progress, not sentiment. Jobs, not junk. Tear it down." The contrast was stark. Those who came to mourn and protect versus those who came to destroy. "They're trying to provoke a confrontation," Carlisle observed. "Get footage of veterans attacking construction workers. Paint us as the aggressors." Sarah laughed bitterly. "Let them try. We know how to hold a line." The two groups faced each other as darkness fell. The diner caught between them like disputed territory. Mason organized the veterans into shifts, maintaining a protective barrier without engaging Brennan's provocateurs. Margaret kept coffee flowing, feeding anyone who entered, refusing to let the threat outside poison the sanctuary within. Then Carlisle's phone rang with a call he couldn't ignore. The board chairman, Walter Hutchinson, a man who'd turned profit margins into a religion. "Victor, what the hell are you doing?" Hutchinson's voice could have frozen helium. "You're destroying everything we've built." "Everything I've built?" Carlisle corrected, putting the call on speaker so the others could hear. "With my money, my connections. Money that belongs to shareholders now. You have a fiduciary duty." "I have a duty to my son's memory," Carlisle interrupted, "and I've failed it for 5 years." "Your son is dead," Hutchinson said coldly. Your responsibility is to the living, to the thousands of jobs that depend on Carlisle Industries. Are you really going to destroy all that for some mongrel dog in a rundown diner?" The silence that followed was electric. Mason saw Carlisle's hands clench, the billionaire facade cracking to reveal the grieving father beneath. "That mongrel showed more humanity than you've ever possessed," Carlisle said quietly. "And yes, Walter, I'm going to destroy it all, or transform it. The board meets at 9 a.m. tomorrow." "I'll be there." He hung up and looked around the room. "They'll come at me with everything. Mental health provisions, hostile takeover clauses, character assassination. I need ammunition." "You have it," Emily said, gesturing at her laptop screen filled with evidence. "Brennan's embezzlement alone is enough to cause chaos. Add in the systematic discrimination, the surveillance footage, the connections to hate groups he's been fostering." "Hate groups?" Margaret interrupted. Emily nodded grimly. "Those aren't all construction workers outside. Some are from organizations that target veteran support systems. Brennan's been funding them, using Carlisle Industries' money. He's been playing both sides, destroying communities while profiting from the chaos." A rock crashed through the window, showering glass across the floor where Rex had died hours earlier. More followed, accompanied by shouting from Brennan's mob. The veterans outside held their line, but tension crackled like electricity before a storm. "Enough," Margaret said. She walked to the shattered window, visible to both crowds. "Mr. Carlisle, you asked what Danny would want me to do with his life insurance. I know now." She turned to face the room, but her voice carried outside. "Danny believed in second chances, in redemption, in the power of community to heal wounds." She looked directly at Carlisle. "I'm going to use his money to create a fund for veterans struggling with acceptance, for families torn apart by grief and misunderstanding, for communities fighting to survive. The Danny Sullivan and Tommy Carlisle Memorial Fund," she continued, her voice growing stronger, "because they died together, loving each other like brothers, because Rex brought them back together in death, because hate is learned but love is chosen." Carlisle's eyes filled with tears. "Margaret, You'll contribute too," she said firmly. "Not from guilt, but from hope. We'll turn your weapons into tools, your network of destruction into a network of support." Outside, the shouting had stopped. Both crowds listened, drawn by the simple power of a mother's voice choosing love over revenge. "Tomorrow, you'll face your board," Margaret continued. "You'll tell them the truth. Win or lose, you'll have done what Tommy wanted. You'll have chosen courage over comfort." Mason watched Brennan's crew begin to fracture. Some lowered their signs, others drifted away. Without hate to fuel them, they had no purpose here. "But tonight," Margaret said, turning to where Rex's body lay waiting, "tonight we honor a soldier who showed us the way home." The revelation was complete. The billionaire who'd weaponized grief would face his reckoning. The community that had seemed powerless had found its strength. And a dog's death had become not an ending, but a transformation. Rex's last mission wasn't over. It was just beginning. Dawn broke over Millbrook with unusual brilliance, painting Danny's corner diner in shades of gold and amber. The crowds had stayed through the night, maintaining peaceful vigil, and now they lined the street as a small procession emerged from the diner. Mason carried Rex's flag-wrapped body, Margaret walked beside him, and behind them came a river of people, veterans, families, strangers made kin by shared grief and unexpected grace. They buried Rex in the small veterans section of Millbrook Cemetery, in a plot Carlisle had purchased that morning between two markers, SGT Danny Sullivan and CPL Tommy Carlisle. The young men lay side by side in death as they'd stood in life, and now their guardian would watch over them forever. Dr. Hayes had come, bringing a small headstone she'd commissioned overnight. Rex, military working dog, he brought us home. As Mason lowered Rex into the earth, 100 hands saluted. Even Brennan's remaining crew, watching from across the cemetery, removed their hard hats in respect. The lone bugler from the VFW played taps, each note hanging in the morning air like a prayer. Carlyle stepped forward when the last note faded. He looked different, older but somehow lighter, as if confession had lifted years of weight. "I have a board meeting in 2 hours," he said quietly. "They'll try to destroy me. But Rex taught me something. Sometimes destruction is just transformation waiting to happen." He pulled out his phone and showed Mason a message. "My lawyers found something interesting. Brennan doesn't just skim profits. He's been shorting our stock before each acquisition, making millions on the market manipulation. It's enough to bring federal charges." "You could use that to save yourself," Emily observed. "I could," Carlyle agreed. "Or I could use it to save everything else." They returned to the diner to find it transformed. Overnight, volunteers had repaired the windows, patched the walls, replaced the damaged tables. The memorial wall had grown. Alongside Danny's photo now hung Tommy's, and in the center, a portrait of Rex, ears alert, eyes bright with the intelligence that had saved so many. Margaret stood before the wall, touching each photo gently. "Joe, that offer you made 4 years ago, to be partners, is it still open?" Joe Walker straightened, surprise flickering across his weathered face. "Always was, Margaret. Always will be." "Good, because this place is about to get busy." She turned to address the room. "The Danny Sullivan and Tommy Carlyle Memorial Fund starts today. Not tomorrow, not after bureaucracy and paperwork. Today. Emily, can you set up online donations?" "Already done," Emily said, showing her phone. "We've raised $50,000 since last night." Carlyle checked his watch. "I should go. Face the music." "We're coming with you," Mason said. It wasn't a question. "You don't have to." "Rex spent his life protecting his pack," Sarah interrupted. "We're your pack now, whether you deserve it or not." An hour later, Carlyle Industries' boardroom filled with an unusual assembly. 12 board members in $1,000 suits faced a wall of veterans in worn jackets, Gold Star mothers in their Sunday best, and one small-town diner owner clutching a manila folder. Walter Hutchinson gavelled the meeting to order, his face pinched with disapproval. "This is highly irregular, Victor. These people have no standing here." "They're witnesses," Carlyle said calmly, "to what I've done, and what you've allowed." He began with Tommy's story, his voice steady despite the pain. He showed the surveillance footage, the harassment campaigns, the systematic targeting of veteran businesses. When he revealed Brennan's embezzlement, several board members shifted uncomfortably. "You're clearly suffering from grief-induced psychosis," Hutchinson declared. "I move for immediate removal." "I second that motion," Brennan said from his seat, smirking, but Carlyle smiled. "Margaret?" She stepped forward and placed the folder on the table. Inside were contracts, signed that morning. "Mr. Carlyle has liquidated his personal holdings, $80 million. It's been placed in irrevocable trust for veteran rehabilitation and LGBTQ+ military support services. He's also signed over all Carlyle Industries properties obtained through the harassment campaign back to their original owners." The boardroom erupted. Hutchinson pounded his gavel. "You can't do this without board approval." "I can't do it with company assets," Carlyle agreed. "But my personal fortune, my own properties, that's my choice, and I choose this." He looked around the room one last time. "You want to remove me? Go ahead, but you'll be removing a man with nothing left to lose and everything to gain. I'll spend whatever time I have left honoring my son's memory properly, fighting the hate I helped create." Mason watched Brennan's face cycle through rage, disbelief, and finally fear as FBI agents entered the boardroom. Emily's evidence had reached the right hands. "Richard Brennan," the lead agent announced, "you're under arrest for embezzlement, market manipulation, and conspiracy to commit fraud." As they led Brennan away, Carlyle turned to the stunned board. "Gentlemen, you have a choice. Transform this company into something worthy, or watch it burn in the courts of law and public opinion. I've lit the match. What happens next is up to you." They left the boardroom in chaos, but outside something beautiful was happening. The morning news had picked up the story, not just of Rex's death, but of his life, of redemption found in a dog's last mission, of communities choosing love over profit. Standing on the sidewalk, watching the city wake up to a different kind of story, Margaret took Carlyle's arm. "Tommy would be proud." "I hope so," he whispered. "God, I hope so." Mason looked up at the Carlyle Industries sign towering above them. Soon it would come down or be transformed. Either way, Rex's mission was complete. He'd brought them all home: the lost father, the grieving mother, the broken soldiers, the divided community. In the end, love had won. It just took a dying dog to show them how. The diner waited for them, doors open, coffee brewing. There was work to do, a foundation to build, a community to heal. But first they'd share breakfast at Danny's table, raising their cups to a German shepherd who'd saved them all. Rex's collar hung on the wall now beside the photos. If you looked closely, you could see where the leather had worn smooth from loving hands. If you listened with your heart, you could almost hear the echo of his last, contented sigh. Mission complete, all present and accounted for. Finally, blessedly, home. Dear friends, if Rex's story touched your heart, you're not alone. Many of us have known the unconditional love of a faithful companion who stayed by our side through life's darkest storms. Whether it's the dog who sensed our grief before we could name it, the friend who showed up when everyone else walked away, or the unexpected kindness from a stranger that reminded us we're not forgotten. These moments of pure love are what make us human. Rex understood what we sometimes forget, that loyalty isn't measured in years, but in presence, that healing begins when we choose connection over isolation, and that it's never too late for redemption. In a world that often feels too fast, too harsh, too disconnected, isn't it remarkable how a simple act of compassion can unite an entire community? Margaret found hope in her darkest hour, because one soul refused to let her face it alone. That's the power we all carry, the ability to be someone's Rex, to notice when they're struggling, to stay when it would be easier to leave. What act of unexpected loyalty has changed your life? Who was your Rex, the one who wouldn't give up on you?